The 21-year-old suspect linked to a leak of confidential US defense and intelligence documents is expected to appear in court on Friday.
US President Joe Biden says Ireland and the United States have a partnership for the ages. After a speech in Parliament, he attended a dinner in Dublin Castle. Protesters clash with police on the final day of demonstrations before France's Constitutional Council rules on President Macron's controversial pension reform.
A 21-year-old Air National Guardsman in Massachusetts linked to a leak of confidential US defense and intelligence documents is due to appear in court on Friday. Attorney General Merrick Garland identified the suspect as Jack Teixeira and said he would be charged with the unauthorized removal of classified national defense information.
FBI agents took Teixeira into custody earlier this afternoon without incident. He will have an initial appearance at the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts.
An airman first class, he was a cyber transport systems officer responsible for keeping the internet working at air bases. He joined the Massachusetts National Guard in 2019. The Pentagon ordered an internal investigation in what could be one of the biggest leaks of intelligence documents in a decade.
Good afternoon. It is important to understand that we do have stringent guidelines in place for safeguarding classified and sensitive information. This was a deliberate criminal act, a violation of those guidelines.
At least 50, but perhaps more than 100 secret documents were posted on the gaming platform Discord, including sensitive information about the war in Ukraine.
A standing ovation for US President Joe Biden in Dáil Éireann. As he made an historic address to the Irish Parliament, the President said he was home and promised a future of unlimited sharing possibilities between Ireland and the US.
This is the United States of America and Ireland. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. And we got to believe that. We got to know that, because that's the history of both our countries. This is about defending the values handed down to us by our ancestors, keeping the flame of freedom we inherited, the beacon that's going to guide our children and grandchildren. It's a struggle we're fit to fight together.
Biden went to Dublin Castle for his final engagement of the day, where a banquet dinner was held in his honour. Host of the event, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, said that both the US and Ireland had a similar past and philosophy, one where they are joined by bonds of kingship as well as friendship.
Joe Biden will end his visit to Ireland on Friday. He'll visit a Catholic basilica in the town of Knock and will conclude his visit with a public address in the town of Ballina, where his great-great-great-grandfather Edward Blewett emigrated from Ireland over 140 years ago. This is Ken Murray for Euronews at Dublin Castle.
Dispersing Parisian demonstrators with tear gas. At least a dozen police officers were injured and some 47 people arrested in the French capital on Thursday, in a final show of resistance before France's Constitutional Council ruled on President Macron's controversial pension reform. The CGT union says the demonstrations, although smaller than previous ones, attracted 1.5 million people throughout the country, a figure the police dispute. They say around 380,000 people took part in the protests. Most of the demonstrations were peaceful, like this one, filled with music. These are so-called techno-activists who mix slogans against Emmanuel Macron's pension reform to electronic beats.
On rejette, c'est le système qui sous-tend la réforme des retraites. Et en fait, c'est un système qui veut nous faire travailler plus pour produire plus. Et jamais on pose la question de mais produire plus pourquoi? Est-ce que c'est juste pour continuer à enrichir une poignée d'actionnaires? Est-ce que c'est juste pour continuer à vouloir atteindre une croissance qui serait celle qui nous rendrait heureux, mais ça ne nous rend pas plus heureux en fait? Ce qu'il faut faire à l'aune du dérèglement climatique et du fait qu'on se dirige vers le chaos climatique, c'est juste réfléchir à qu'est-ce qui est essentiel, qu'est-ce qui est non essentiel.
Like many of the hundreds of thousands of demonstrators who stepped out on Thursday, Mathilde hopes the movement will go all the way.
Il faut un retrait de la réforme. En fait, Emmanuel Macron refuse, pour l'instant, il refuse de reconnaître qu'il a eu tort. Mais en fait, c'est la seule issue. Personne ne veut cette réforme. Même économiquement, elle est mal ficelée, elle est mal faite. Le mouvement social, je ne sais pas quelle forme va continuer à se mobiliser. Mais en tout cas, cette colère, elle ne va pas disparaître du jour au lendemain. Cette opposition non plus.
Manifester dans la joie, c'est ce que Mathilde Caillard et les membres de son collectif comptent bien faire, et ce, dit-elle, jusqu'au retrait du texte, peu importe la décision cruciale du Conseil constitutionnel attendue par tous les Français ce vendredi. Cyril Forneris, Euronews, Paris.
The Russian Ministry of Defense and Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin acknowledged each other's roles in the Bakhmut effort. The Russian Ministry of Defense and Prigozhin claim that Wagner fighters comprise the main effort to take territory and push Ukrainian forces in central Bakhmut, whereas unspecified Russian airborne elements comprise the supporting effort on Wagner's flanks north and south of the town. The Russian forces on the flanks likely aim only to hold the flanks rather than make any significant advances. Now, this array of forces suggests that the Russian Ministry of Defense intends to use the Wagner Group to capture Bakhmut while minimizing casualties among conventional Russian forces, supporting the Institute for the Study of War's prior assessments that the Ministry of Defense seeks to use Wagner forces to capture Bakhmut, then supplant them and take credit for the victory. Russian forces continued ground attacks in and around Bakhmut and did not make any confirmed gains in the city. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that fierce fighting is ongoing within Bakhmut and that Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensive actions near Khromovo, 3 kilometers west of Bakhmut, and Bogdanivka, 5 kilometers northwest. The Institute for the Study of War says Russian forces are visually confirmed to control at least 76.5% of Bakhmut as of the 11th of April. The think tank says Wagner Group is likely involved in the removal of Ukrainian civilians, including children from Bakhmut, by moving them further into Russian-occupied territory or deporting to the Russian Federation.
North Korea says it has tested a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, which Kim Jong-un said marked a major step in Pyongyang's capacity to conduct a nuclear counterstrike. All of the capital's known intercontinental ballistic missiles are liquid-fueled and solid-fueled ICBMs, both of which can be launched from land or submarines and have long been on the top of Kim's wish list. These missiles are easier to store and quicker to prepare for launch, which makes them harder to detect and destroy mid-strike.
China is keeping up the pressure on Taiwan despite the formal conclusion of its recent military drills. On Wednesday, Taipei tracked 35 flights by Chinese warplanes within the previous 24 hours, as well as 8 Navy vessels in the waters surrounding the self-ruled island. Regional tensions haven't been helped by the US and Philippines holding their own largest ever joint military drills, which China has called a provocation. EU powerhouse Germany has pitched in with calls for calm, clearly blaming Beijing for the inflamed situation.
Rolle spielen. Wir sind sehr besorgt über die Lage in der Straße von Taiwan. Von allen Beteiligten in der Region erwarten wir natürlich, dass sie zu Stabilität und Frieden beitragen. Das gilt ebenso für die Volksrepublik China.
However, French President Emmanuel Macron said on a visit to the Netherlands that he will not join in a verbal escalation of the Taiwan situation.
La France est pour le statu quo à Taïwan. La France soutient la politique d'une seule Chine et la recherche d'un règlement pacifique de la situation. C'est d'ailleurs la position des Européens. Et c'est une position qui, de tout temps, a été compatible avec le rôle d'allié. Mais c'est justement là que j'insiste sur l'importance de l'autonomie stratégique. Être allié ne signifie pas être vassal. Ce n'est pas parce qu'on est allié, qu'on fait des choses ensemble, qu'on décide de faire, qu'on n'a plus le droit de penser tout seul.
China claims Taiwan as its own territory and has a policy of one day bringing the democratic island under its control.
The European path advocated by the French president regarding Taiwan raised controversy. Emmanuel Macron calls on the Union not to show followership towards the United States or China on this issue. For some, these remarks made after his trip to Beijing are dangerous because they could crack European unity and transatlantic solidarity when it comes to Beijing. However, not all observers denounce the strategic autonomy defended by Paris.
President Macron has, for several years now, repeatedly emphasized his view that Europe should develop what he calls strategic autonomy. And I think depending on what you want to see in that concept, different people see different things. For my own part, I don't see that as a threat to to transatlantic unity at all. I think that there's plenty of people in the United States who would support the idea that Europe should do more to be a strategic actor in its own right, and Europe stepping up to do more, especially in light of the threats, both proximate and global in today's era, would be a good thing.
Dan Baer also points out that certain elements of the analysis presented by the Commission President resonate in Washington. For example, Ursula von der Leyen spoke of the need to preserve the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. However, just after the visit of the European leaders, Beijing conducted a military exercise to encircle the island. In this context, the idea of a European third way seems very difficult because the security of the Union depends on the United States.
We should follow the US as far as in our interests, but it's obvious that our values and our interests are not the same of the US, but are closer to the US than to China. So I don't think that we should just blindly follow the US, but talking about neutrality or equidistance here, I think is not very realistic, because neither our values or our interests are equidistant from Washington and Beijing.
For the EU, the priority remains to keep the channels open with Beijing. The head of European diplomacy was supposed to go to China this week, but his trip has been cancelled due to COVID-19.